Having covered the origins and the cult of the god Hermes, from his birth in a cave in Arcadia, and his many devious and amusing exploits, which resulted in his admission into the assembly of the gods at Mount Olympus, we have also studied what can be learned of his cult practices, learning of those who prayed to Hermes for wisdom, eloquence, messages from the gods, easy learning, good fortune, and so much more. In this essay, we explore the god's psychology and what may be cautiously called the personality type of his followers and those who participate in the actions and emotions that Hermes represents. As well, we take a look at some of the phenomena that correspond to the god in his capacity as an aspect of divine intelligence within human beings and the natural world. Considering that the gods are richly complex, take on changes over time, and have early depictions often as physical beings who are simultaneously active in the external world and within an individual's consciousness, we will speak of Hermes in a manner that leaves out none of these layers, and when the term Hermetic is used henceforth, it will be used primarily in reference to the Hellenic Hermes, not so much related to the Hermetica, or the writings attributed to the sagely Greco-Egyptian divinity Hermes Trismegistus. It is always risky to approach the psychology of an ancient god from a time so far removed from his primacy, and we cannot be certain that all of the following angles explored regarding Hermes were also shared or valid in the ancient world. But that the Greek Hermes represented something quite real indeed, and just as real in the present day, can be taken up with certainty. To zero in on this divine reality, we must ground our exploration of the god in the classical literature, magical texts, and the statues and inscriptions that portray him, while giving ourselves room for creative expansion. If we did not allow for this room, then we should count ourselves as quite poor participants in that clever intelligence so broadly displayed by crafty Hermes. Although human personalities cannot be reduced to mythological archetypes, such timeless archetypes can become themes and tools for the personality. The gods certainly did invite those humans who most resembled them in character, thought, and action to worship them specifically, and receive blessings more or less exclusively belonging to them, as if the souls of these humans had been uniquely under the watch and protection of the deity in question. The uniquely Hermetic psychological type is nowhere better conveyed than in Hermes' origin story, where we find the full range of his characteristics in the Homeric hymn to Hermes. In the hymn, Hermes is born secretly in a cave on Mount Selene in Arcadia. Hermes is the son of Zeus, king of the gods, and of the nymph Maia, daughter of the Titan Atlas. In the first day of his life, Hermes exhibits the cunning resourcefulness, mischievous thievery, and ambitious confidence that portray his early features. Outside of his cave, Hermes finds a tortoise, from which he invents the first 7-stringed lyre. And as he plays his music, singing joyfully and even mockingly of his mother and father, he creates novel songs and lyrics, embodying an immediate intuition of harmony, wordcraft, and improv. He leaps straight off to business, stealing Apollo's cattle, and inverts their hoofprints to confuse whoever attempts to track them. He disguises his own tracks as well, hardly ever pausing to strategize, but acting on an instinct entirely his own, innovating what had been previously unimagined, and engaging with the primordial thrill of thievery in the night. He later sacrifices 12 portions of meat from 2 cows to the Olympian gods, displaying an innate reverie and piety, and yet calling on the gods to favor him even while he is trespassing on Apollo's tolerance, engaging in theft, and certainly not ready to spill the truth of his deeds, even at first to Zeus himself. During this sacrifice, Hermes also prevails over the lesser temptations, driving him to eat of the meat he had prepared for the Olympians. And Hermes sacrifices 12 portions, cheekily including himself among the Olympians. When all-seeing Apollo confronts little Hermes, the god has pretended to have been asleep the whole time. He has put on the airs of a feeble infant and lies to Apollo in quick order to divert attention from his theft. The craft and amusement he invites in these lies even prevails over Zeus, who eventually takes Hermes in. Hermes is given his greater roles of responsibility as guide of souls in the underworld, and the god who transmits messages for Zeus and those between Olympians. Hermes is given the more or less exclusive power to come and go from Earth to Olympus and Hades, communicating the messages of the gods to mortals. The young god charms Apollo with his music and slips out of punishment, inspiring Apollo to trade him his cattle and offer up his golden wand, which is used to wake humans from sleep and lull them into it. But this apparently fair trade in Apollo's eyes is actually more advantageous for Hermes, who avoids getting thrown into murky Tartarus and secures for himself a career among the deathless gods. Hermes is not content to have his mother live in a cave with no surplus of riches, as if they alone should be the gods who go without worship. And so Hermes swiftly steals a great wealth for he and his mother, as if to do so required nothing so much as the barest flexations of will. In fact, Hermes feels entitled to such possessions, and the time between his thoughts and his manifestations is not long at that. Hermes' ultimate aim in the hymn is to secure a place among the gods for himself, which he does by being an exemplar thief, speaker, and charmer, proving to Zeus that Zeus's plan for Hermes to be the medium for his demands to gods and mortals was not done in vain. If this promotion was out of the cards, if Hermes could not aspire to equal honors as that given to his brother Apollo, then Hermes threatens to create a great deal of mischief for the gods. In the act of stealing from Apollo, Hermes created an opportunity to develop a relationship with the god, earn a powerful magical device, and gain the attention of his father Zeus and the Olympian assembly. Hermes also maintains his individuality among the Olympians, being the only god to operate in so many realms at once, fulfilling a unique role for which there is no greater substitute. With his humor, his charm, and his ability to reframe an otherwise damning series of events into opportunities for gain, Hermes becomes Zeus's greatest diplomat, even if he did not always tell the whole truth to achieve his father's goals. Hermes possesses the quick mental instincts which afford him every advantage, and he can appeal to the morally gray world in that he has all of the same grayness in him, and isn't so naive to imagine that others are lacking self-interest. Rather, Hermes is quite comfortable in acknowledging self-interest and understands the human characteristics because he also walks the borders between those extremes of good and evil, divine and mortal, as much as he was the god of roads, travelers, and god of the boundary. His skill in negotiation and thievery play into his role as the god of trade and bargaining. He can articulate the value of a thing, and even inflate that value or phrase the value in a manner that appeals to the self-interest of the customer. Hermes was the original smirking hustler at the Agora, and may indeed have traveled some darker roads if not for the gods' swift intervention. And yet, Hermes seems to have planned for and created the opportunity for this intervention since the beginning, as he leaned into mischief just long enough for the gods to take notice and fashion for him a greater responsibility. Even more, we can find Hermes in many places, recognizing his capacity for theft, and yet demonstrating his power of restraint. So let us leave no turtle shell unturned, and examine each of Hermes' well-known roles for their psychological implications, weaving in the relevant ancient references which further convey the evasive, mercurial aspects of this outstanding divinity. It would indeed be a great tragedy to our study if Plato had not included Hermes in his etymological dialogue, the Cratylus. In this dialogue, where Socrates speaks with a man named Hermogenes, Socrates clarifies the reason Hermogenes has been picked on regarding his name. Hermogenes had been picked out for having a name that doesn't suit his skill set or personality. And in this example, we see plainly that with Plato and the philosophers, the gods are also recognized insofar as they appear through the individuals who are named after them or exhibit their characteristics. But in the case of Hermogenes, Socrates says, quote, "He means to say that you are no true son of Hermes because you are always looking after a fortune and never in luck." Later in the dialogue, the critique is taken further, and Hermogenes is found to be poorly named for his lack of eloquence. A long dialogue ensues and ends with Hermes, who is regarded as the god who named things, as can also be found in the teachings of Pythagoras. But when Hermogenes says, quote, "I should like to know about Hermes, of whom I'm said not to be a true son," Socrates replies with, quote, "I should imagine that the name Hermes has to do with speech, and signifies that he is the interpreter or messenger or thief or liar or bargainer. All that sort of thing has a great deal to do with language. And Hermes is, quote, the god who invented language and speech, and we may imagine him dictating to us the use of this name." Hermogenes then agrees with Cratylus' criticism because he is not a good hand at speeches. Later, Cratylus regards Hermogenes' name as not belonging to the man at all, but to someone else who, quote, has the nature which corresponds to it. This having the nature which corresponds to Hermes is the type of psychology we will be exploring, given in its foundation by the Homeric hymn and conveyed through many other sources, such as the Greek tragedian Aeschylus, who, writing prior to Plato in the 5th century BC, featured Hermes in the end of his play Prometheus Bound. In Prometheus Bound, Hermes descends to Prometheus to warn the Titan about the consequences of his crime of stealing fire from mankind and deceiving Zeus to do so. The many juicy ironies on display in this dialogue cannot be overstated. Within Hermes and Prometheus's heated exchange, we notice many Hermetic attributes at work, which were obviously known to Aeschylus and not alien to the audience he was writing for. Hermes approaches and lambasts Prometheus as a bitter sinner against the gods, who should quickly explain his reasons for cursing Zeus so that the impatient Hermes doesn't have to make multiple trips to settle what can be done with a single conversation. "Bravely spoken in truth," says Prometheus, "and swollen with pride is your speech, as befits a minion of the gods. Young you are, as young your power, and you think indeed that you inhabit heights beyond the reach of grief. Do you think I quail, perhaps, and cower before these upstart gods? Far from it, no, not at all. But scurry back the way you came, for you shall learn nothing about which you question me." Hermes resents Prometheus's behavior and thinks he may indeed enjoy his current suffering. Prometheus counts Hermes along with his enemies, and so Hermes declares him to be stricken with madness, unable to keep a sober mind in his declamations against the gods. And, much as in the Homeric hymn, when Hermes rebukes his mother for speaking to him as if he were the child he appeared to be, Hermes says, quote, "You taunt me as though indeed I were a child." "And are you not a child, and even more witless than a child, if you expect to learn anything from me?" asks Prometheus. "So then, let his blazing lightning be hurled, and with the white wings of the snow and thunders of earthquake, let him confound the reeling world." Here we find Hermes as the god who comes on Zeus's behalf to negotiate actions of apology, even with the most stubborn detractors. Hermes persists and pleads for Prometheus to bend his will to wisdom and to think on the suffering he will endure if he does not submit. Hermes proceeds to throw more threats at Prometheus to no avail, referring to himself as, quote, the mouth of Zeus, who utters no falsehoods regarding Prometheus's fate. Prometheus doesn't regard this as any news and proclaims Hermes a rather noisy messenger. When Hermes finally departs, having failed to steer Prometheus away from his course, he asks that Prometheus bear in memory this warning and not to blame his fortune when all of Hermes' threats come to pass. For now that Prometheus is warned, he will have no one to blame but himself for his calamity. This enlightening back and forth depicts Hermes as the warning system from the ruling divinity, predicting what may come to pass and not pulling any verbal punches to drive the point home. We may imagine by implication how we are often warned by our internal voice against persisting with self-destructive actions, only to fail to heed the omens and meet the disastrous consequences our inner Hermes has already foretold. The differences between Hermes and Prometheus have been the subject of fascinating psychological contrast. Even though Hermes and Prometheus resemble each other in few respects, as cunning thieves, with each an association with fire and intellect, Hermes does not partake of the same degree of insult against the gods or self-sacrifice as Prometheus, and is perhaps more pragmatic when it comes to avoiding personal suffering. Hermes is defiant when the conditions favor his defiance, and he works within the divine order, whereas Prometheus could be seen to be defiant for altruistic purposes and disruptive to the divine order. In either case, when Prometheus tricks Zeus during a sacrifice, it is apparently for man's benefit, as Prometheus sees it, whereas Hermes sacrifices to the gods for their own sake, knowing all the while it will be personally beneficial. Hermes in his own myth depicts the personality with a proclivity for trouble, and yet one who can appeal to enough friends and gods to weasel out of it. Hermes is no moral purist as a youth, but is likely to persist in devious behaviors, and through them, learn the higher virtues as a result of divine intervention. In this way, the youthful Hermes must learn to forego petty ambitions to embody a purpose greater than the self, a role of a collective benefit over that of self-aggrandizement. He gets away with what he can when he can, but would lose himself and his relations with the gods if he pushes it too far. This Hermetic psychology is one that runs the risk of personal grandiosity. If the grandiose passions and fiery, titanic ambitions are not exercised or properly channeled, the individual may meet the implosive depression that stems from repressing such energies or never transmuting them into a higher calling. Zeus and Apollo give Hermes this higher calling at the start, and the little god hardly protests inasmuch as he feels right at home in a role of real power. He feels as though he were made for it, and so do the gods. The ambitious side to Hermes is the same as the ambitious aspects in ourselves, but Hermes' ambitions are not the sort to remain unnoticed or unexercised. There is no other choice but to exercise them. The thematic Hermetic mind instinctually acts according to its inner nature, requiring nothing by way of permission or instruction. In Hermes, we find that sense of confronting an entirely new circumstance and environment, and thereby activating an internal confidence that proclaims it can rise to the occasion and meet the odds straight away, even though it may not at the time have any evidence for believing so. Hermes set out to enrich he and his mother and could have very well been punished as a result of his lies and tricks, but the deception paid off, and he became one of the deathless gods and avoided being thrown into Tartarus. This riskiness and thrill-seeking behavior is quite naturally employed by Hermes, who transmutes the otherwise punishing consequences of his deeds into a career serving the king of the gods. Much as Hermes, we might say, rules the minds of those who take their chances and are still prone to good fortune. Hermes as the god of travelers plays into his key position as intuition itself. Intuition may be understood as a messaging system connected with a higher mind. Hermes, as the traveler, can set off on a journey with full faith and confidence. Just as the traveler into the unknown may encounter a variety of challenges which intuition can help, Hermes possesses the toolkit to meet these challenges and benefit the most from them, converting whatever comes his way into gain and opportunity, stealing out of an unfavorable event some empowering favor from the gods. Hermes must serve a higher purpose and facilitate the information of this purpose to others, lest the darker side of the sword of his ambition cuts off his own head in the process and creates all manner of trouble for mortals. Hermes exhibits the capacity for self-initiation and does not require mediation to commune directly with God, but is himself naturally positioned to act as that mediator for others. He is a teacher in that he possesses the skills necessary to bestow wisdom without taking himself too seriously. Hermes possesses the enchanting solar wand with the capacity to lull men to sleep or rouse them into an alert state of mind. With the right flourish of speech, a follower of Hermes may stoke the inner fire of his listeners and thereby strengthen the communicative link he already possesses with the gods. In the mouth of a monotonically boring teacher, even the most delicious mystery may appear just as mundane as the speaker, never landing with any verve or vim, but shrinking entirely from the thing the teacher seeks to communicate. Put that same mystery or subject on the tongue of the hermetically inspired, and suddenly an entire realm opens, the floodgates of the flow state deluge into the forefront of the mind, and curiosity combines with excitement to release intellectual and creative pressure. This is not the dry intellect which examines and regurgitates facts for their own sake, scared to comment on or meet the unknown, but a charged intellect that makes the most with what it has, and is not afraid to engage with a subject as if it were a natural and familiar setting. Now, while the Hermes type may have a knack for trickery, may have a mind for deception, this capacity must be subverted, or engaged in the opposite direction of service for the gods and humankind. The Hermetic Psychology is a hint that in the same mind of the devious thief, trickster, and con man is also the creativity that can be engaged for collective gains. For if Hermes must play his tricks, let him trick warring parties into peaceful agreements. Let him trick the pompous tyrant into changing his ways for goodness. Let him trick the purely selfish energies of the individual into a cause of collective benefit. What is it that should make the mouth of Zeus be one who is clever, quick, and sharp-witted? Surely the vocal representative of the highest god should possess the fast-acting mind which can cover the spectrum of nature's energies, and sees both the value in competition and the value in working together, operating each with clear communication. Hermes is one who is well liked by all, without changing himself to be liked. He is chameleonic in fact, not chameleonic in an artificial or superficial sense, stemming from a crisis of identity. Hermes is capable of adapting himself to meet the needs of the moment. His social improvisations and handsome externalities can charm and seduce, sway and alter the world and the people around him. Hermes is the center of his own world, ever seeing far into the distances and smirking in observance of a grand plan, a plan he too must serve. Hermes is playful on one hand, full of life and joy, and also indispensable, devout, and purposeful. Hermes lives in the minds of those who pick up skills quickly and can communicate complicated webs of information with simplicity. This constitutes one as a son of Hermes, as much as a gifted and initiated scribe in ancient Egypt was a son of Thoth, god of writing and divine intelligence. The studious will find that those who lack the traits of Hermes often fail to behold the fascinating qualities of the god or draw any connections between them. The god himself has at times fallen prey to the most boring heaps of academic jargon, pedantically spouted out by those not fit to clean Hermes' winged sandals, let alone liberate the qualities in their own personality which might improve their communication. Imagine being taught about the psychology that animates sneaking around in the night by people who have never snuck in and out of anything as a child, Imagine being educated on the gifts of Hermes by those who have never charmed anyone, never given an eloquent speech, never spent hours under the stars in discussion or seduced an Aphrodite. It is only natural for Hermes to fly over the heads of those who confine the god to the books they hunch over, and find nothing in their own behaviors that resemble him, as if the god somehow protects himself from profanation, like the mystery cults protected their ritual secrets with vows of concealment. Hermes is properly called evasive by those who study him, and he is much like the mercurial substance named after him, which reflects the world around it, is difficult to grasp, and fills the shape of every vessel that contains it. As soon as one naively hopes to pin the god down and proclaim they have found his fixed nature, they should just as well proclaim they have learned absolutely nothing about the god. Hermes is the god of the boundary because he transcends boundaries, violates the limitations, and in so doing serves that ultimate state of change, which is the changeless state of infinite consciousness. And as we will explore, Hermes is firmly positioned within every individual's consciousness as that aspect which survives death and guides the soul through the underworld. Since the most ancient times, gods were tied to the observable motions of the planets, and the planets were assigned each a corresponding divinity. The planet Mercury in particular has been assigned to gods of language beyond that of Hermes and the Roman Mercury. The Mesopotamian god of writing and god of the scribes, Nabu, or Nebo in the Bible, was associated with the planet Mercury, as we can see from a Neo-Assyrian astrological report in the 7th century BC. Quote, "If the star of Nabu rises in the east of the month of Elulu, the scribes will prosper, and the king's decrees will be obeyed. Nabu, lord of wisdom, grants favor." Nabu was also the inscriber of destinies and the administrator of all the upper and nether world, a god who gave broad understanding, whose word is supreme in heaven and earth, and who organizes the universe and organizes the whole of heaven and earth, the Lord of wisdom who grants wisdom and understanding. Thoth, the earlier Egyptian counterpart to Hermes, who the Greeks equated to Hermes seemingly as soon as the people came in contact, was likewise the organizer of the universe, god of souls, god of scribes and writing, and, per the excerpt of the Greco-Roman astronomer Claudius Ptolemy, quote, "The star of Mercury, because of the speed of its motion, is assigned to Hermes in the Greek tradition, and in the Egyptian tradition it is associated with the god who presides over writing and knowledge." It was only fitting that Hermes was assigned the fastest planet, closest to Apollo. There is little doubt that Hermes and Apollo's close ties in the myth played into this association. To the 2nd century Latin compiler of astronomical myths, Pseudo-Hyginus, the planet was attributed to the Roman Mercurius because the god first established the months and perceived the courses of the constellations. The astronomical art has been attributed to Hermes at least by the time of Herodotus in the 5th century BC, who was appropriating more of the Egyptian Thoth than the other way around. It is no stretch to assume Thoth and Hermes had already been syncretized prior to the establishment of the Greek colony of Naucratis in Egypt in the 7th century BC. It is useful then to know where the Egyptian Thoth intrudes upon the attributes of Arcadian Hermes. Anyone who reads Plutarch or Diodorus Siculus will notice these deities conjoined without any disclaimers, as was often the case since the Ptolemaic period. And yet it is possible that an Egyptian influence was exercised on Hermes from the very beginning, considering Thoth was worshipped prior to and throughout the Bronze Age. The question of Thoth's early influence on Hermes cannot be ruled out. As of yet, no conclusive Bronze Age precursor to the Arcadian Hermes has been found, but there are many good reasons to believe he existed, and became the Hellenic memory of a more ancient deity. At least 2 Linear B tablets hint to a Mycenaean Hermes, possibly as far back as the 14th century BC, where on Crete, in the sanctuary of Hermes and Aphrodite, a worshipper might make offerings of oil to the god. At this same sanctuary, as published in Antonis Koutsonis's 2019 study, a depiction of a Proto-Hermes is found as far back as the 10th century BC. Efforts like those of A.L. Frothingham have been made to find a Babylonian precursor to Hermes, but so far nothing substantial has come of it. The Etruscans of central Italy in the 7th century BC definitely worshipped Hermes in the god Hermes, who can be shown in inscriptions to have been a divine messenger and a shepherd of souls. This timeline coincides with the earliest archaeological evidence for the Arcadian Hermes. And on the island of Imbros, Hermes went by the un-Hellenistic name of Imbramus, in which the great Hermetic scholar Carl Carigny sees a pre-Greek Hermes. For on this island sacred to Hermes and the Kabirian mysteries, we find an inscription that refers to, quote, initiates in the mysteries of Hermes, cluing us in to the decidedly mystical and most obscure aspect of the god. It is worth remembering that with the collapse of the Bronze Age, the languages of Mycenaean Greece and Minoan Crete collapsed along with their literacy, and in effect, these peoples would have fallen out with their gods of writing and language, giving way to the Greek Dark Ages. One might argue that when writing and the widespread use of language returns, so too does its god. But where our hopes for a Mycenaean Hermes may be lost with the Bronze Age collapse, Thoth the Egyptian remained quite ancient and relatively stable throughout. The Greek philosopher Plutarch intrigues this whole situation further. As a Platonist who traveled into Egypt, Plutarch would not have ignored Plato's association with both Thoth and Hermes to language. Plutarch says, quote, the Egyptians give the name Hermes to Thoth, and they consider him the inventor of writing and the lyre, and the interpreter and messenger of the gods, and the first month, which is called Thoth by them, is sacred to him. Minus the calendar month and the emphasis on writing, we find all of Hermes' attributes here. Plutarch tells us more, quote, hence they say that at Coptos, the statue of Horus holds in one hand the privy members of Typhon, and they relate a legend that Hermes cut out the sinews of Typhon and used them as strings for his lyre, thereby instructing us that reason adjusts the universe and creates concord out of discordant elements, and that it does not destroy, but only cripples the destructive force. These two mentions of the lyre give credit to Thoth as its inventor, who some Egyptians and Plutarch himself equated to the native Greek Hermes, without making any fuss of it. Diodorus Siculus likewise equates the two gods, and indicates an Egyptian version of the invention of the lyre. These and other late references continue to emphasize Thoth as part of the historical substrate out of which Hermes was born. Plutarch's theological reference to Hermes as the Logos and the ordering principle allow us to segue into the cosmological layer of Hermes, as a god not confined to a mischievous personification in hymns, plays, and poems, but a principle at the foundation of the universe, making order from chaos, symbolized by the musical note, or, more importantly, the enunciated word, which is a sign, through sound, that possesses underlying meaning, and is a messenger for the thinking faculty which brought the word about. This act of the spoken word, as the moving thought brought into the world, is the cosmological Hermetic motion, a kind of phallic entry of an active principle, causing nature to be adjusted into a complex beauty, carrying out a message that is cosmologically the first and the all-thought of Zeus. In this manner, Hermes has been taken up by philosophers to represent the universal mind, and the creative divine intelligence that binds all consciousness to its source and remains with it during its beginning and ending phases, crossing every border with the soul as it moves along. This is more in keeping to the Egyptian system where Thoth can be seen as understanding and divine intelligence personified. As well, in the Book of the Dead and the Coffin texts, the deceased soul is no longer distinguished from the god in question, becoming at times Osiris and Thoth. This is a reality which the Hermetists likewise instructed their disciples in. As we return to Hermes and his Hellenic roots, he is, like Thoth, also the psychopomp, or guide of souls, a responsibility the god maintained since at least the 8th century BC. In his role as psychopomp, we find Hermes in his most layered and metaphysical place. As the biographer of Greek philosophers Diogenes Laertius emphasized, quote, Hermes is the steward of the souls, and that is the reason he is called guide, keeper of the gate, and subterranean, since it is he who conducts the souls from their bodies and from the earth and sea. He conducts the pure souls to the highest region, and he does not allow the impure ones to approach them, nor to come near one another, committing them to be bound in indissoluble fetters by the Furies. The same author, in his biography of Pythagoras, recalls the account of Heraclides of Pontus, who said that Pythagoras traced one of his previous incarnations back to a son of Hermes named Thalides, who had once been asked by Hermes to name any gift but immortality, and the god would supply it. The gift Thalides asked for was the preservation of memory, whether he be living or dead. In this way, when the soul of Thalides transmigrated into other human beings, he retained his memory of previous lives, so that Pythagoras too, in his incarnation, could recollect all of his former lives back to Thalides. Hermes, in this way, is the supplier of recollections, not just in the sense of keeping a sharp mind on a daily basis, but recollecting information not accessed in the current incarnation, but learned beyond. In the hymn to Hermes, when the god enchants Apollo with his music, the first god Hermes commemorates in this song is Mnemosyne, mother of muses and the Titan goddess of memory. In light of this transmigration connection, we can ascertain more meaning in the depiction of Hermes set up with an erect phallus, or the ithyphallic Hermes, the four-cornered stone pillars, which Herodotus claimed had a secret meaning in the Kabirian Samothracian mysteries. If we connect these ithyphallic depictions to Hermes' role as guide of souls and guardian of the gate of souls preborn and deceased, then we see the erect phallus for what it is, namely the physical means by which a soul incarnates and is impregnated into the material world. The erect phallus, then, is not merely an emblem of arousal or vulgar sexuality, but an emblem of the soul bringer, the discharger of souls, as Corinne put it, the medium through which every soul crosses the border between realms and arrives into the world. The author of a 3rd century magical invocation to Hermes appears to pick up on this interpretation of Hermes' phallic energies when he writes, quote, "Come unto me, Lord Hermes, even as into women's wombs come babes." This is the same author who identifies with the god in his theurgical invocation when he writes, quote, "I know thee, Hermes, and thou knowest me, and I am thou, and thou art I." For Homer, Hesiod, Aeschylus, Euripides, Apollonius of Rhodes, and most of our earliest sources, Hermes is the same fleet-footed messenger of the gods, traversing Hades and Mount Olympus with urgent tidings. Hermes was the speech, voice, and interpreter of the gods' will, crafty with words, guide of souls of the dead, bringer of luck, and capable of magical counterattacks, as depicted in the Odyssey when Hermes helps Odysseus counteract the sorcery of the witch Circe. The Greek word for messenger is angelos, and as we can see throughout biblical accounts, the angels or messengers of God often relayed their messages through their human conduits, much as the demons inside of the man who called himself Legion used the man's tongue to speak. Hermes can be said to function through all of these vectors, which is why the magician might proclaim unity with the god during an invocation, and why the authors of Hermetica attributed all of their own writings to Hermes. For Pythagoras, Hermes was the naming power and the wisest of all, who in one capacity was a divine man who had physically lived, and in other capacities was a proper god with his classic characteristics. Pythagoras' late biographers, Diogenes Laertius and Iamblichus, both depict Pythagoras' understanding of Hermes as synonymous with the god's Egyptian counterpart in Thoth. In the Orphic hymns, Hermes is called to incline to one's prayer as a celestial messenger of various skills, being a prophet of discourse and inventor of language, who improves memory and fortune. For Plato, Hermes was speech and the faculty of interpretation, the supplier of names, and the aspect in the human psyche which can turn fraudulent. For Plutarch and Diodorus Siculus, Hermes is conjoined to his Egyptian counterpart and takes on the attributes of both deities, including the role of the cosmological logos. The Stoic Epictetus adds his flourish to Hermes when he equates the god's wand to the interpretive reasoning function of consciousness that decides the meaning of things. In classic Stoic spirit, Epictetus claims he can convert even the worst of circumstances to his advantage with the wand of Hermes, which is clearly an internal, psychological instrument, not a physical wand waved with the hand. Hermes was also the god of dreams, at least by the 8th century BC. In dreams, many messages can be delivered to a soul across a variety of levels. For Homer, not all of these messages should be trusted. The dreamscape, or the land of dreams for Homer, can be considered a plane unto itself, into which we cross over every night. Here Hermes acts as guide and a guardian, as much as he guards the gates between any realm to which the soul may travel. Hermes is therefore the god of oniromancy, or dream divination. In precognitive dreams where the future is glimpsed, or an exact future event is depicted symbolically, it is the hermetic function in the psyche which both transfers the message and interprets it. This also fits into Hermes' capacity as the god of travelers, not limited to physical travels but extending to spiritual journeys. Interpreted internally, Hermes is that aspect of consciousness that remains with the soul after death and was with it prior to birth. Hermes' functions, taken holistically, present him as the god of the daily phenomena of consciousness and parapsychological events. As the bringer of good luck, god of travelers and gains and divine messages, he is the god present inside the synchronistic moment. I do not use the term synchronicity in any way to imply merely a chance occurrence or a meaningless coincidence, but the mysterious phenomena of serendipity, where you find yourself at exactly the right place and time, or just happen to stumble upon the thing you were looking for, or experience that thing finding you in the most statistically unlikely scenario. As a later Hermetic author once put it, chance is an unordered impulse, an image of activity, a false vision. Synchronicity is one of the great enigmatical truths of divinity which, like Hermes, cannot be grasped, bound, or repeatably measured. It is a kind of cosmic trick played on the mortals who, when compared to the mind of a disembodied god, must only appear to grope at divine truths without ever fully experiencing them. These synchronistic events are moments of crossing a boundary in experience, unleashing a flurry of mental stimulation for those ready to meet it halfway. We observe Hermes as the god associated with such events not from speculation, but because the Greeks had a term for it. A Hermaion is a gift of Hermes, or, as it is often translated, a godsend. In Plato's Symposium, when Aristophanes discusses what could become a serendipitous change in a philosophical discussion about love, he says, "It would be a Hermaion if someone like him were to converse in such a way, enriching our understanding. In Aristophanes' comedy, Plutus, a character celebrates a sudden windfall of profit as a, quote, splendid godsend, Hermaion, bringing wealth beyond our hopes. Demosthenes, Xenophon, Socrates, and Aristotle all use the term in the same way. Two specifically synchronistic usages of Hermaion can be found in Aeschylus and Plutarch. In Aeschylus' Against Timarchus, Aeschylus refers to the sudden reception of a fortunate piece of evidence as strengthening his legal case against Timarchus. Quote, this evidence came to light, and it was a godsend to us for the trial, strengthening our case. In Plutarch's Moralia on the fortune of Alexander, the writer regards a campaign victory of Alexander the Great to be a Hermaion of fortune. Quote, it happened as if some godsend from fortune befell him, aiding his conquest. These usages demonstrate the ancient relationship between sudden fortunate occurrences and the power of Hermes to provide them, showing that Hermes' relationship to synchronicity is not a modern abstraction or a Jungian imposition, but an early connection to the god we are only rediscovering. He is the winning streak of luck, synchronicity as well as a hint at what may be a more constant state of experience. Synchronicity may already be operative at all times, but the weirdness increases as you become aware of it and play with it. A Hermaion is a sudden stroke of good fortune that can be seen in modern synchronicities when an individual thinks about a person they have not seen in years and, lo and behold, that person walks up to them moments later. This synchronistic event comes packaged with its own potential meanings, however much the Nietzsches of the world might argue that these meanings are dangerous or unattainable. Some synchronicities are so perfectly confounding that they cannot be explained away or dismissed as chance, but should be regarded as the internal world meeting the external world in a precious unfoldment. In the case of Hermes, synchronicities and our interpretations of them become a kind of study unto themselves, a dialogue between the soul and the gods of the world who interact with it. The magician who praised Hermes or Thoth as the inventor of incantations would not count it as mere chance if an orb of light appeared above the temple at the very moment that a daimon was invoked. The common occurrence of thinking about someone who then shows up in our lives shortly thereafter can be examined under the Hermetic umbrella of phenomena, an umbrella which guards against all of the hailstorms of rationalism and dismissal by routinely confronting the soul with experience after experience until it becomes insane to deny the anomaly and wise to accept it. As we saw from Diogenes, Hermes is the soul's custodian, which keeps it in contact with those most suited to its type, not allowing impure souls to approach the pure, not mixing the alchemical detritus with the finished product of the philosopher's stone. Hermes is likewise present in the insightful epiphanic moment. He is the fleeting inspirational thought that proclaims, "Eureka, I have found it." Otherwise, he would not be credited as the inventive source of the arts and sciences and the medium of language that expresses them and the medium of music utilized in the worship of the Olympians. Hermes dwells within the entire mechanism of intuition, where there is an immediate knowingness of a thing that required no physical means for the knowing to occur. Hermes straddles all such boundaries between the everyday awareness of the common man and the mystical eudaimonia of the initiate, presenting the individual with the conundrum of the déjà vu and the telepathic download. Hermes is the congregation of the dynamic powers of consciousness. These powers are not stagnant and do not limit themselves to mortal personalities, but in their infinite ranges, they take on the mysterious quality of eternity, which has no ending in sight. Hermes is the patron of thieves in more ways than simply being the thrill-seeking deviant who sneaks around at night. Hermes is that aspect of consciousness that appears to steal or find what does not belong to it, and makes that thing his own. Offerings of food left at roadside herms that were later found by hungry passers-by were also Hermaian windfalls, and were stolen, as it were, from the god, in keeping with Hermes's thievish spirit. Hermes transcends the normal limitations of the mind and reflects the world around him, becoming the vessel that he fills and just as quickly moving on. Indeed, Hermes had so many duties that when he became a character in one of the dialogues between the gods in the work of the great satirist Lucian, Hermes is depicted as complaining about having to do so much work and be in so many places at once and wait on the wishes of others. He humorously conveys he has lost all of his freedom and should seek to be a slave to a new master, saying, quote, "I am half dead with it all." For Diodorus Siculus, Hermes was the inventor of wrestling, and not just one of the two common gods whose statues were found outside of the gymnasia. Hermes presided over competitions and was a patron of the gymnasia for all of the obvious reasons of his strategic mind, his handsome physique, agility, speed, and his ability to trick his opponents into giving him the upper hand. Everywhere Hermes not only exudes beauty, but understands it and produces it in music, word, movement, and interpretation. The Hermetic mind is one capable of recognizing beauty because it is also capable of engaging with the same arts and sciences that create beauty in buildings, songs, books, and rituals. Hermes was not content to merely observe, but must embody the harmonies of the divine order and connect each of them to one another. It is no wonder that Hermes is a mind that moves so fast it may get ahead of itself, if not for clarity of purpose. Hermes is forever on the journey, remaining fluid, never content with the destination. Hermes lays claim to the relative truths of the material world by understanding the borders between crime and justice, and he attains the primal truth of the cosmos because he joins heaven to earth, connects earthly things to their heavenly forms, and thus bears his goat-legged child Pan, who is, as Plato put it, in the upper part smooth and in the lower part shaggy. Hermes has been argued to be a pre-Olympian god, not only as a son of the Titan-descended Maya, but as a more primordial aspect of the psyche that turns up in both rustic and urban settings. Hermes, we might say, is the test case against theological and mythological ignorance. If he can't excite you, no god ever will. To the Islamic philosopher Abu Mashar, Hermes was a title applied once to a prophet who lived before the flood, named Enoch by the Hebrews and Idris by the Arabs, who wrote many books and inscribed his wisdom on the walls of Egyptian temples, lest it be lost. Quote, "It was he who constructed the pyramids." In some early Masonic manuscripts, Hermes was an antediluvian prophet of wisdom, who secured the knowledge of the pre-flood civilization and brought it into Egypt. For the 20th century psychic Edgar Cayce, Hermes was a high magician of Atlantis, who brought the esoteric sciences into Egypt and constructed the pyramids at Giza. It seems everywhere we find the esoteric tradition, in any of its extremes, we uncover some version of Hermes sneaking along the way, escorting various candles of wisdom to their destinations, regarded in some places as an individual who historically lived in the most ancient times, an immortal demigod of superhuman power who could aid mortals with very physical challenges, or a mental principle actualized through states of being that result in arts, sciences, and other inventions, a state of consciousness, distinct in its own nature and manifest in very specific types of humans and activities. And in his most cosmic and foundational role, Hermes becomes the universal mind, ushering the world into being. In conclusion, it is only proper that Hermes has the most attributes of any god that there ever was, because he is the God that assigns everything its name and interprets every attribute. Thank you for liking and subscribing. If you would like to support the channel, please cross the boundary into my Patreon with the links below in the description, or become a Hermaion yourself with a one-time donation. Please be well, and may Hermes grant you pleasant dreams.